Many of you have also heard me speak about the receptivity to innovation and evolution, including technology in agriculture. You know, farmers as a whole are very pro technology and adoption and these types of things. They're a skeptical customer. You get one shot at it, but in their kind of life cycle, this is something that they're very open to. If you think about it in a larger lens, you know, GPS assisted steering, which really is the first steps toward autonomous, has been in the market already for 20 years in the agriculture sector. You know, the wheat that we used to grow in Western Canada in my grandfather's era was very susceptible to rust, and you know, grew very tall with lots of straw. Well, now our wheat is quite short, and there's a lot of resiliency that's been bred into it. And this is from innovation in a traditional means, and the digitization of agriculture is really an incremental step of that. We're using new tools and we're using data and technology to move things. And when we look on the horizon, and one of the things we're focused on at Verge, I mentioned, is that operational layer. And we think that that's the key gateway when we think forward toward autonomous farming. And when people say autonomous, they often think of this, you know, future Jetsons-like ecosystem. Everything's kind of floating around and robots kind of working in the dark. And that's certainly one aspect to it. But as I mentioned, you know, we believe actually we've already been on this autonomous operational journey for 2 decades, certainly in Western Canada, with GPS assisted steering being those first building blocks. And that's technology that now is on over 1.1 billion cultivated acres globally. So if you think about kind of where we're at on our autonomous journey, it starts from that lens, it starts to become very interesting. And that brings us into kind of where we see a lot of opportunity, and that is kind of second order problems, or how we think of them. What are the solutions that we can bring forward? What's the ROI that we can generate for a farm by looking at things like calculating in an easy way for the farmer to digest, you know, soil erosion based on mechanical operations, so they can start to mitigate that. But then when they start to mitigate that and plan their operations better, that can feed into Erik's technology of provision analytics, and can feed all the way through to the box of Quaker oats, that now we can show that these oats were actually more sustainably grown, or perhaps they're carbon neutral or glyphosate free, or whatever the kind of feature is you're trying to communicate to that end customer, then that the end customer is wanting to see. We see that all coming through the operational layer, so we can answer a lot of the questions going forward, but at the same time by providing, you know, real value to at the farm level. And that's certainly a global piece. The profitability margins globally at the farm gate have continued to compress. You know, there's lots of chatter in the US Midwest about increasing rise in bankruptcies. In South America, you know, there's all sorts of issues that they have with respect to getting to market. You know, currency risk. You know, the Brazilian dollars in kind of constant limbo. They're entering an election period relative to trade wars globally as well. And then in Canada, you know, we're not without our own issues as well, including trade and structural. So we think that there's a lot of opportunity going forward in agriculture, in the digitization. We think we're in the early innings, but we also think that there's been a lot of attention paid to discrete issues, discrete solutions, and the real value that we're going to start to see accelerating, and we're already starting to see some of that with some of the tools that we're developing, is in what we consider kind of these second and third order problems that are out there. And happy to, you know, obviously talk about that further as we roll here with the conversation.
Thank you very much, Will. And we're going to have Erik to give us an example of what is going on at the software level. And then after that, we're going to open the door for discussion.
Definitely. Thank you, Virginia. So Bill, Virginia, and Wilson all kind of alluded to elements of what we're tackling and where provision analytics falls into the value chain, and what we're providing today, and some of the vision of what we have in the future. So close to 3 years ago, we launched the company Provision Analytics really focused on digitizing the very antiquated processes that exist in the center of the value chain. So whether it's a grain buyer, a packer of fruits and vegetables, and the value-added processors that Bill alluded to, all of those processes, believe it or not, somewhere between 90 and 97% of these companies still operate on paper, spreadsheet, clipboard, and ironically chalkboard that you see behind me. So in doing that, in their effort to meet and manage regulatory concerns and measures around food safety, compliance, traceability, quality control, everything that they have to do to match what we've seen with the Food Safety Modernization Act in the US in the last 8 years and the Safe Food for Canadians Act in the last 3 years, we're coming in and providing a software solution to digitize that and streamline their operations, not only from a pure digitization standpoint around cost control and efficiency injection, but also finding mechanisms to reduce food loss, to increase that top line revenue item where our core focus is of horticulture and grain. Those are the two highest segments in agriculture in terms of food loss, where fresh fruits and vegetables average around 20%, and the grain market itself, whether we're looking at value-added processing of pulse production into protein flours, or if we're going as far as bakeries and breweries, you're looking at somewhere around 16 to 18%. So that's just pure money that's left on the table. That's really what our software offers today. Now, the greater data vision and what we're trying to do over the next 5 years dovetailed in nicely with Bill's mention of consumer demand for data and insight. While a lot of people think that food comes from the grocery store, food comes from the farm. So we have to partner with players like Verge Ag, Skymatics, our other partner in the initiative with Protein Industries Canada, and then some other global partners that we've started to reach out to in the data space. So one in Greece, one in the Midwest. Pull that data together, start to aggregate it at a farm level to understand the decisions being made on farm, so that we can take the notional idea of sustainability that has always been a vertical construct. It's always been, what are the decisions made on farm to increase sustainability, and turn that into a horizontal discussion. The data and the decisions made at the farm, how can we take that information and correlate it downstream to the processor, the packer, that value-added food manufacturer, to understand how they impact each other and start sharing the information both ways. So how can I increase efficiency for a manufacturer? How can I streamline decision-making around inputs and timing for the farmer? So that's really the high-level element of what we're doing with Verge, as I mentioned. So some of those key takeaways, to be less vague, we're building some AI and machine learning algorithms right now around capturing full carbon usage throughout the entire value chain, understanding food loss metrics at aggregate, on farm, through transport, through the grain buyer and the processor, and into manufacturing, looking at aggregate water usage. And one of the far more lofty goals that we have as part of this project is to understand the caloric efficiency of the movement of product. Over the next 10, 15, 20 years, depending on the publication you read, there will be a struggle around just meeting food security and the general demands of not only developing countries, but Canada and the US alone. So we want to understand how many calories are being shipped rather than the traditional metrics of weight. And that's really some of the driver that we see coming forward. This dovetails in, honestly, coincidentally, with a recent announcement from the FDA last week. So we saw Frankie Yanis, who is the kind of global thought leader and lead at the FDA around food safety, announce the second leg of the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is heavily focused around digitization, whether that's directly into software or through some sort of IoT mechanism. It's capturing that data and understanding a little bit further at aggregate what type of value-added information that we can drive out of this. Provision Analytics won't be the only player And that's inherent with our approach and everything that we're doing with Protein Industries Canada is it has to be partner forward. The food value chain is extremely fragmented. Over 94% of companies in the global food supply chain have less than 100 employees, yet food and agriculture employs over a third of the world's population. So that fragmentation drives the need for partnership. And I think that's what's incredible with what Protein Industries Canada has done and the mechanism that they put forward to drive their program. It doesn't force, it encourages partnership. That's going to drive some of the things that Bill was talking about around efficiency and insight, and then driving to that almost utopian goal of being able to provide consumer insight at some level.
Thank you very much, Erik. With that, we're going to open the floor for questions. Well, we get the first question. It was very interesting how it was mentioned at the beginning, about 20 years ago or 2 decades ago. It seems that we were looking, when it came to the digital application in agriculture, it seemed that we were looking, we had the solution, and that solution was looking for a problem to solve. I think 20 years, if we move the clock, we have moved for that. We have moved from that. We are applying many new techniques in the agriculture sector, but I would like to get your input. What are the barriers that are stopping producers, that are stopping farmers to actually fully embrace these technologies?
I'll go first at that, Virginia. Honestly, I think part of it is a return on investment to that farmer customer profile. There's been a lot of technologies that have come out. There's been a lot of big promises that have been made, and part of the problem, I think, why those technologies didn't reach the promises that have been made is these problems are so complex, and solving kind of one discrete piece of it or one aspect probably can't unlock the 10% return on investment or 20-30% return on investment that farm level consumer is trying to achieve. And part of that's also because there's a scarcity of resources. You can only invest in kind of so many of these items. And I still recall and laugh at a conversation I had in Saskatoon about a year ago, where a well-seasoned farmer had said, I sure could go broke saving all this money that all this technology promises. And it's an interesting concept, by the time you kind of adopt all these things, if they're not reaching that level of return that's promised. And so to us, we think that's, has to be front and center. And I don't think agriculture is any different than any other market. Has to be front and center, that you're providing real tangible value to that customer. And that's how you're going to encourage adoption, and that's how you're going to get the uptake. And then from there, when we start thinking about, if one of the benefits is sustainability, well, now we start driving sustainability because we've also got an economic reason for the tools that drive that sustainability to be adopted at the farm gate. So when we look at it, that often is a headwind of, well, I've tried all this stuff before and I got, best case, my money back. So how can we provide better solutions?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Wilson. And the only thing I might add is, this question of the value chain approach. And so the data and information that we gather at the farm level is important. It's only important and useful if it's then benchmarked against other producer data, so you can get a sense of what you're doing, and then carried throughout the value chain so we can realize the whole value of it. I think we've, there's lots of good initiatives and lots of good technology, but we've got data that's been compartmentalized, even if it's within the farm or within the farm community relative to the transportation industry, relative to the food processors. So some questions around interoperability need to be discussed, and the sharing of data to get the full utility out of it. But that's really just tied to exactly what Wilson said, which is the return on investment for producers and the whole value chain.
I agree with Bill. I think, and in a way it's interesting. So food in general, there's always going to be a demand for food. People eat or want to eat 3 times a day. So food producers, whether it's an apple or it's wheat, there's always generally going to be a market. I think price is and ultimately margin are the two things that come out of the entire scenario. And given the relative recency of data analysis and a lot of the bad news that ends up hitting a lot of different news feeds out there, whether it's Facebook or these other companies that are doing nefarious things with data, that inherently creates a level of ignorance and misunderstanding of the value that can be driven out of data at one point in the supply chain or the entire supply chain. So there's some elements of education that have to happen there. I grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan. My dad farms a couple thousand acres of grain, and there's not a chance he was going to give someone his data. The deeper you go into that conversation, there's not really a logical reasoning for that other than a relative misunderstanding.
And I think it's also worth noting at this point too, that when we talk about this conversation, it often gets focused around that farmer, that kind of everybody can quickly picture that person out in that field, growing food for the world. But the other thing we need to think about is, and Bill touched on this, is that the entire system is so complex. There's so many different stakeholders. And so when we think about ROI, like how can we tie all that together? For example, like at Verge, when we're designing our products, and what we're very focused on, we actually look at agriculture just around broadacre grain production. And we identify 8 discrete customer segments, not even personas, but segments. And then of course there'd be multiple personas within that. And so when we're thinking about as a collective room now about how can we provide value to agriculture in this digital transformation, and I can see some of the comments, there's some interesting stuff around, Government of Alberta comments on agriculture supporting economic innovation and jobs in the province, and we're hearing those themes from a lot of areas around the world, not just in Canada. Thinking about, well, just a minute, large banks, financial institutions, insurance companies are also considerable stakeholders within the agricultural landscape. They're providing, debt and risk mitigation tools and a whole sort of things. We've got some equipment, some folks that are in the equipment dealership world on this call. I recognize some of the names. Alberta's home to some of the biggest equipment dealership groups globally, actually. And we should be proud of that. That's a whole nother segment which ties into a lot of the mechanical pieces, not to mention the supply chain and the trains and boats and the logistics aspects, landowners, both institutional and not so. So there's so many different kind of ways we can look at these problems, and I think we focus quickly on the farmer, but that's only one part of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted, Virginia.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. This is the joy of technology and having virtual meetings. So thank you very much for your comments. And I was just saying that indeed the farm is only a very small component of the entire chain of production. There's even other sectors that are going to influence agriculture. So along those lines, and before we get questions from the audience, which by the way, please send your questions. We have 3 amazing speakers, and this is an amazing opportunity to get to pick their brains into this topic. But anyways, I was saying, so as we understand that the farm is a very small component in the sector, in the agricultural sector, I was wondering if you can elaborate, how do you see Alberta? How do you see Canada? What is the role that we're going to have as a province and maybe as a country in contributing to food security for the world? We know our sector, agriculture sector, is very important for the province, but how do you see ourselves from a global perspective, and how are we going to help the world to produce food?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll take a stab at that, Virginia. Just ground us in a few stats. I always like numbers, but Canada is one of 5 jurisdictions globally that's a net exporter of food, and we are very fortunate in this country to have the landmass but a small population base. So, you know, is your question around how are we going to contribute? And I think the answer is greatly to the global food security question that's coming. And so, you know, Wilson talked a little bit in his comments about, or maybe it was Erik, about food security long-term and the requirement for that. Canada has a responsibility to be a global supplier of food. And especially if you think 30 to 50 years out and the impact that climate change is inevitably going to have. We're actually one of the other, you know, a jurisdiction that's not only a food contributor, but one of the jurisdictions that from an agricultural perspective could benefit from changes in climate change. So, you know, if we get the system right in terms of being a global supplier of highly sustainable, highly nutritious, and be a supplier of choice, we really set ourselves up for long-term success in the agriculture sector, given, you know, demographic changes and climate change impacts.
I think to build on that, one statistic that I had heard, actually, Bill, I think it was one of the Protein Industry Canada events, was that Canada, due to where we sit, our massive landmass, the incredible growing conditions and soil that we have, by, I think it was about 2040, we'll be the only sustainable commercial crop producing country on earth. So that's a combination of erosion, farming practices, water usage, etc. One of our guys in-house is constantly tracking the total fresh water that exists in the world, and something like 2/3 of it exists in Canada. So with that, and right or wrong, I think I take more of a capitalist approach to this to understand how we can differentiate our product. This is the rant that Bill's had to hear me go through 3 or 4 times. I think there's a genuine opportunity to decommoditize Canadian product. So whether that's against the US or Europe or whatever, this goes back to some of my very deep interest and curiosity around the wine space and the wine supply chain. And I can see Bill grinning because he's definitely heard this a few times. Wine is the only truly decommoditized consumable product on earth. Some people could argue a little bit that maybe marijuana is going that direction, but until maybe 15 years ago, where we've seen the beer or the craft beer revolution, nothing is decommoditized like wine. Where Cabernet Sauvignon could be grown on a south-facing slope at a 15-degree drainage in California, that gets $12,000 a ton. And then you try to grow the same thing in New Mexico and you're getting $2,000 a ton. Why can't we do that with grain? We produce barley malts at volume that is superior to the US. We produce canola that is superior. The list goes on. Wheat, peas, an array of other pulses that are getting exported all over the world. And as we see things change in the next 10, 15, 30 years, we're going to increase that to more value-added production. We should be able to decommoditize that product to identify where it came from, the practices that are going into it, the water that was used or not used, where that water came from, and ultimately market it right down to a quarter section level to understand everything that went into that product and how it was shipped to increase the value of that product. We're already seeing this in the US at the processor level. Heineken is buying barley malts from just east of Calgary for the beer production specific to Lagunitas for the consistency. If you can create and provide a consistent product to the processors or the manufacturers, you're reducing their calibration and operating costs, you're reducing their food loss and increasing their top line. The farmers should benefit from that by capturing some of that value add in the price that they charge for their product by providing something consistent. So if it's wheat that is fortified with, I don't know, zinc or selenium or something like that, that's providing an additional value to what the consumer wants, or what's increasing the operational throughput of the value-added processor, the only way for the farmer to realize that value is to track that information of all those decisions they make and share it downstream.
Thank you very much. Well, now we are getting questions from our audience, and I'm gonna go back a little bit to the return of investment question. And this is a very interesting, so there is a lot of risk. And as we mentioned, a producer is not gonna risk an investment. So the question is for innovators, for people that are in this sector, should we have a subsidized environment to mitigate the risks of that innovation?
Well, as you know, and I'm happy to start, Virginia, as someone who I think we struggle with this, or at least get hit in the face with it every day, as we're developing new tools and new products and trying to prove that ROI to customers, and not just in Western Canada, but globally, in those markets. I'm similar to Erik, not a big proponent necessarily of suggesting that we need a subsidy to roll through. Actually, I think Canada has a tremendous innovation ecosystem, and of course, it's improving, and there's room for improvement. But that already helps to fuel some of that. But I think the teams also need to be willing to bare their soul a little bit, and go out and connect with those real customers, get that feedback, offer up the technology for free or otherwise, and be very intentional about that. Make sure you're finding the right people that are willing to work with you and provide value back. And there's lots of them out there from a customer perspective, so that you can get that information. And really, it's just another way of saying product market fit. And it's really a listening tour in a lot of ways. We spent, luckily there wasn't COVID in 2019. In a 7-week period, I personally walked fields with grain farmers in every major grain growing region in the world, other than Russia, to ensure that our product set was at least thinking about the problems in those different layers. And I think we're all missing that mark if we don't chase that, to make sure that we've got that ROI. And lo and behold, of course, those people that you're working with get emotionally invested in the product and become your first customers and some of your highest margin customers right out of the gate.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And first off, Erik, yeah, I was smiling when you're talking because I love the concept of decommoditizing agriculture. I have heard it before, but I'm a true convert, and that's why I was supporting. I agree with Wilson. I mean, we talked about one of the things holding back the acceptance of digitization in agriculture and its return on investment. So the concept of a subsidy, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, this has to have value for everyone in the value chain in order for it to be a viable technology. So at Protein Industries Canada, we're helping de-risk some of that innovation investment by providing part of the backstopping part of the research work to get there. So in essence, we are doing that, but this is always built around a strong return on investment in the marketplace. So I would tend to be aligned with Wilson.
I agree.
Thank you very much. We have 3 minutes before we need to move into the rooms. And as you can see, there's been many comments, more comments than questions. Some of them echo what the 3 of you have said about food safety and just the image and the opportunity that Alberta and Canada has to contribute to food safety and just food provision in general for the world. So with this, in a couple of minutes, if one of you could just close and say what are really the risks that come what is stopping innovators from actually doing more technology, creating more technology. So not so much from the adoption perspective, but from the creation perspective.
I think I'll tackle that one first. I think that Canada in general is very risk adverse when it comes to capital distribution and investment at an entrepreneurial level. Having gone through continual investor talks we started the company in Denmark. So my first exposure was talking to VCs and private equity firms in Northern Europe, speaking to over 90 different VCs and family offices in North America. I can say that Canada or Alberta in general, regardless of the jurisdiction we look at here, there has to be a lot more, I guess, open appetite for risk at the capital level. That might sound like a generic statement, but the capital that's flowing out of the US into this space is doing so at valuations that are 10 to 15 times higher than anything that's being respected in Canada.
Yeah, maybe I'll take a stab at it too. This probably sounds a little self-serving coming from an organization that advocates for collaborative R&D, But I think, Virginia, some of the issue is the problems and issues that we're tackling are so complex that no one organization can do it on their own. And so this idea of open innovation and collaborative R&D, I think we have to get better at that in Canada to start tackling some of the issues and challenges that we're talking about. So in addition to what Erik has said around the need for growth capital in the capital markets, which is certainly holding us back in the agri-food sector in Canada, I think the concept of collaborative R&D is another element. There's no silver bullet, but I think that's another element.
I often joke, particularly when we're international, that we're very Canadian in that we're very cooperative and agreeable, and so I think looking within and building on that strength, that can really become our competitive advantage. Kind of back to even where this started, it's taking a non-collaborative, non-cooperative approach that I think has gotten us to where we are, kind of discrete solutions for discrete problems, and not allowed us to unlock these kind of second order effects and generate that true ROI that really starts to ripple through the economy as a whole, let alone within agriculture. And it's important, always to look at and learn from others. We've talked about decommoditization of agriculture. A lot of those themes are things we're starting to see bubble up a little bit in energy when we talk about the carbon concentration of Canadian energy, and we should be maybe trying to export our energy because it'll displace another energy source that isn't as clean or as ethically sourced and whatnot. The problem there, it seems, is that the conversation's starting a little late. What's interesting is in agriculture, we've got that opportunity to not have those same stumbling blocks and get ahead of that. And I think we already are. But we've got a long ways to go. It's certainly early innings.
Thank you very much. Excellent points. I definitely agree. This is very complex, and there is not a simple solution for moving this digitalization into the next step. One of the aspects that you mentioned is collaboration, and networking is key for collaboration, which is what we're going to be doing in the rooms. We're going to be dividing into the different rooms, and then we're going to come back later for our keynote speaker. There is some comment, just a general comment for everybody. There are many comments that were shared with everyone, so you are welcome to read them. And if there is a question that you sent in the last minute, and unfortunately we could not address, I'm gonna put our three very good speakers on the spot, and I'm gonna say they're going to go through the questions and answer them later. So Brenda, I'm gonna give it back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Virginia, Erik, William, and Wilson. That was awesome. And to your point, there's lots of questions. So we're now going to go into our breakout session. There are 7 rooms. You will have some of the facilitators or some of the speakers in the room. We will also have some of our sponsors in the room to guide you. We will be in the rooms for about a half an hour. You will get a 5-minute warning and we'll bring you back. And then Stuart from Olds College will be our next speaker. So Yemi, if you can send us on our way. Thanks everyone.
Which, connectivity has been identified as a issue as we think about the digitization of the sector as a whole.
Excellent. So I wanted to move on because we do have a very full afternoon. I appreciate all of the help here with the facilitation of these breakout rooms. So Stuart is going to be our keynote speaker next. And Stuart is an executive leader with experience in both private industry as well as the finance, post-secondary not-for-profit sector. He is currently the president of Olds College. So Stuart, I know you're here. I see you. I will let you take it over.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, so if you can all just bear with me, I'm going to share my presentation. And this is always a bit of a...
Always the fun part.
Me, so I will do that and I will get going. Okay, can you see it okay?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, that's great. All right, well, thank you, Brenda, for giving me the opportunity to spend some time talking about agriculture technology. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the first part of today's session because I was at an announcement that was being made here at Olds College with Minister Schweitzer and Minister Dreeshen on a grant that's been provided to support a partnership with Olds College and SVG Thrive, which is a Silicon Valley investor looking to establish a significant presence in Canada. They've launched the Thrive Canada Challenge, which is really exciting in partnership with FCC. So you'll probably see a little bit of press on that, but so that was good news, but unfortunately I wasn't able to catch the first part. So if there's anything that I'm duplicating in my comments, I apologize, but I do welcome the opportunity to talk about agriculture technology and the opportunities, challenges, and lessons. This is something that has been close to the hearts of Olds College for the last 3 years. We've been really working on developing out our academic programming and our applied research activities in support of agriculture technology. But I want to sort of start with the proviso that I would probably be the definition of a mile wide and an inch deep on this subject. So I'm reflecting the learnings and perspective of those team members within Olds College that have a lot more understanding and expertise than I do. Some of those individuals are on the session, are in the session, or will also be in the breakout room as well, so we can get into some depth during the breakout discussions for sure. I'm one of the lucky ones. I had the great opportunity of growing up on the farm. I had the opportunity to experience farm life and all of the great things about that. This is a picture of me trying to work and my dad goofing off. And I also had the great opportunity, and I'm one of the lucky ones, to actually have been what Rob SAIT would call a farmer of consequence. My wife and I were producers both turkey producers, and we had a cow-calf operation for a number of years. So again, I got to experience the joys of running an agriculture business and all that goes with it, all the challenges and the risks associated with it, and also the opportunity that it gave to my children to experience that. And the reason why I sort of start with that is because it was during that period of time in my life where I started to recognize that our operation needed to make a significant step change if we were going to be competitive, if we were going to be sustainable as an agriculture operation. Our barns were starting to age, our infrastructure was starting to age. There was a lot of things coming down around biosecurity protocols, around regulation in terms of cumulative effects of water management, manure disposal. Plus, there was a lot of opportunity, I think, for us to become much more efficient and effective. And it was during that period of time when there was a lot of technology coming into the intensive livestock space that we could start adopting, and it created a lot of opportunity, I think, for our operation. And we were really excited about the potential. Ultimately, we decided to sell the farm, however, because of other career opportunities, and that's why I've sort of landed where I am today. But it was an interesting time, just reflecting on how our operation needed to evolve and needed to change and needed to keep up with the technology that was coming at us. And it got me thinking about the future of agriculture, because I was starting to grow my career as well in the post-secondary space, and I started to think about the kind of skill sets that were needed, the kind of education that was needed in order to support an industry that was being hard-pressed to adopt technology and to utilize technology to become more sustainable economically and environmentally. And I started to also think about the kinds of research activities or the research spaces that needed to be developed in order to support an industry, again, that was being pressed as a result of the influences of technology. 10 years later, I would suggest that agriculture is an imperative in terms of the need to feed a global population that is growing and do it in a way that is sustainable and economically viable is an imperative, and it's critically important to think about that. And I think that Canada and Alberta in particular have a tremendous opportunity to meet that global imperative and also demonstrate how to do it sustainably. For decades, Alberta agriculture, Canadian agriculture has been producing more while using less inputs, less water. And so we have a real opportunity not only to feed much of that global demand, but also to demonstrate and produce high technology responses to what's needed, and to really be a leader in the whole production of agriculture technology within the agriculture sector. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Let's get a bit of a sense then for what this technology and agriculture opportunity looks like, and whether or not it is truly there. I'm a firm believer, and I might be biased being a former producer, but I really believe that agriculture is innately an early adopter of technology. Now, I recognize that there's a lot of challenges in adopting technology in agriculture, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and a lot of frustration that occurs in how technology is adopted. But I think innately within producers in Canada and agriculture, there's a real desire to use technology to get better, to be more efficient, to be more sustainable. And I think it's proven out in the stats. You can see that for those farms of consequence, those scaled operations, they're significant adopters of technology. And I want to give one of our neighboring producers an opportunity to talk a little bit more about that. Brenda, can you hear it?
Technology in the next 5 to 10 years will probably change as much as it has in the last 40 or 50. As we go forward, more technology comes to the forefront, and more people see how it can be adapted to agriculture and make their operations more efficient, more sustainable, and give you a better bottom line, because return on investment is big in a farm operation. So technology is at the forefront of better agriculture.
Technology is at the forefront of better agriculture. And what we're seeing in the stats is that it's that younger generation that's coming into agriculture that's really pushing this technology adoption forward. Not suggesting the older generations weren't there, but I think it's even accelerating through the younger generation. And what's kind of interesting about this chart is between the last two censuses, that under 35 demographic actually increased for the first time in a long time by 3%. So we are starting to see a bit of a youth movement in agriculture, and that's really going to press and push the industry forward and in responding to those technology opportunities. I like this this visual because I think it helps for those of you who are sort of thinking about what that move into agriculture needs to look like for your company. This sort of gives you a sense for how the utilization of technology has evolved. It's sort of gone from a specific product to a smart product to smart connected products to systems, to products that are engaged in systems, to what's being described today as systems of systems. If there's a few things to take away from this presentation, take away this concept of systems of systems. Think about it. I like to think about it in terms of even medicine. So if a company is looking to introduce a medical device or a pharmaceutical into the marketplace, they spend as much time, if not more, dealing with the interactivity of those devices or pharmaceuticals as they deal with the opportunity or the problem that it's looking to solve. And that's sort of a good analogy to think about how the technology integrates with other technologies, integrates with other systems on the farm or in the agriculture context is critically important. If you're fixated only on what the problem that the technology solves, but you don't understand how it fits within the system or the system of systems, then you're going to struggle in terms of hitting the mark. And at Olds College, we have the privilege of engaging with a number of these systems. This is an example of an autonomous platform that demonstrates precision agriculture, demonstrates robotics, demonstrates machine learning, demonstrates connectivity, and probably a whole number of other things. So it truly is a system really designed to facilitate economic and environmental agriculture practices. So let's talk about some of the challenges in introducing technology into agriculture. One of the, these, first of all, I'll say I'm not giving you a sense of the full scope of challenges. We could probably have a whole seminar on the challenges, and that would apply to any industry. So I'm going to kind of cherry pick some of the key challenges that industry leaders and producers often talk about, and I will describe accordingly. One of those is imperfect matching. The idea that there's problems or opportunities or questions to be solved or answered, and there's tools that are being developed to address that, but they don't necessarily always match very well. And a good example would be the problem of looking to measure soil moisture in real time. There's an opportunity there if we could do that well in terms of making decisions around irrigation, forecasting disease and yield. And so the tools that are being developed include field sensors. But the problem is the information from field sensors is often limited to only one location in a large field. So you're not getting a full picture of what's happening in that field. And of course, this is an evolving and ever improving sort of context, but that's an example of an imperfect match that needs to be addressed, that needs to be sorted out. I think an example to learn from, and I'll say it's easy for us to say this now, 20 years ago, it might not have been quite as good a match, but is auto steer. And for those who don't know what auto steer is, basically utilizing GPS to allow the tractor to sort of be driven autonomously or be steered autonomously using GPS tracking. And the opportunity was around accuracy and precision application. And if you want to see it sort of in action, just when you're driving down the number 2 highway, just look at all the fields. You'll see straight lines. You won't see a lot of waves like you might have 20, 30 years ago, because most tractors, combines, and other machines on the field are generally driven by auto steer. And so that's an example, I think, of a good match where they've achieved both of those things and more. I would say that there's a ton of multitasking happening in tractors today. Probably a lot of napping as well. Hopefully not too much napping, but definitely a lot of multitasking as a result of auto steer. So that's a good example to learn from. So another challenge would be ROI. Mark Kahn in the video talked about ROI, and that's critically important. And there's often a sense that more data does not always equate to economic value. So just to give you some examples, there's a lot of potential in high resolution satellite imagery. What often happens is it produces an overload of information and data for most farmers. So it really can't extract the value. And also there's an issue with the fact that a lot of equipment or most equipment actually doesn't operate at a sub 1 inch accuracy anyway. So there's challenges in actually sourcing the ROI out of some of these potential opportunities. And again, I'm not suggesting these aren't great opportunities, just saying right now the ROI is still getting sorted out. And there's also some interesting disconnects, and especially for this group when we talk about IoT. There's an opportunity to accelerate the ability to collect all types of data for decision making. But boy, that breaks down when you have rural connectivity issues, and we do have that in Alberta. There is spotty connectivity, especially when you get out into where it counts, and so we need to be thinking about how to pull consistent data and some of the challenges around connectivity in that respect. I want to talk a little bit as well about adoption. There is no doubt, and Olds College is excited about agriculture technology and the convergence of agriculture and technology and the acceleration of that whole space. There's a lot of hype, and sometimes that hype doesn't translate again towards economic value. So I'll give you some examples, and these are great ideas, meaning they are actually great ideas. I'm not being facetious. One is agriculture robotics, automation in agriculture, whether it's broadacre or swarm technology. A great idea, a great opportunity. But the reality is, that we are seeing some interesting things happening in the field, and it's really because it's early days. There's a lot of logistics to figure out around managing, maintaining, even transporting. There's a whole, set of skills that need to be developed, and of course that's a challenge to Olds College about how we support that. And there's a regulatory policy framework that needs to catch up, because certainly when it comes to public safety, when you talk about autonomous equipment running around the fields, there is a need to ensure that we cover our basis in that regard as well. So we are in early days, and that's an example where the hype can sometimes get ahead of the reality in terms of what needs to be done. Artificial intelligence, machine learning. This is a great space for Alberta. We have tons of strength in this space, and there's great applicability to agriculture. But I think we've got to be a little careful in terms of how we're hyping that in the current state. The reality is that it does get used often, maybe a little too much, and there still is a lack of training data sets in the industry to leverage the power of AI and ML to the extent that it could be. So again, great idea, but the reality is that we're still needing to catch up on the adoption side. Detecting diseases, crop diseases from satellite or drone imagery. Again, I think it's just a great space with great potential. But the reality is that oftentimes when those images come, it's actually too late to respond. And in the words of our Chief Technology Officer in Digital Agriculture, he used that statement: instead of providing actionable insights, you can write a nice letter of condolence to the grower, right? So there's work to be done, and that does affect adoption. So when we talk to producers about this issue of adoption and the challenges of ag tech integration adoption, we get these kinds of comments. First of all, it's a lot harder than you think. There is a great appetite for technology. You can just walk into any or step into any tractor cab and you can see multiple monitors. There is massive amounts of technology in these operations that weren't there even 5-10 years ago. But it is hard, and that's something that needs to be just understood and appreciated. There's also, as mentioned, a fair amount of overpromising and under-delivering that occurs, and that creates some frustration with producers. And there's a sense, and this is probably the second key point. If you're going to take away a few key points, this is sort of key point number 2. There is a general lack of understanding of the grower's unique needs or the industry's unique needs. If there's one thing that you can do as a technology company moving into agriculture, is try to understand the needs of the industry. And there's lots of strategies to do that, but I would say that there's a sense from many who are applying technology early stage that still needs to be better understood and better appreciated. So I'll just cover real quickly some additional factors for adoption, and this is sort of a list that sort of comes from some of the conversations that we've had over time. Some of it is repetition. I think a verified return on investment is critically important. Always remember, implementation costs matter, especially when we're talking about primary production. The implementation cost matters. It's low margins, and so in terms of money cost, time cost, those things are really, really important. You need to think about access to usable data as well. So you'll hear about producers needing and desiring and advocating and pounding their fists on the table, which I agree with, in terms of having availability of their data, but also having availability of usable data. It's really important. I would again repeat that whole concept of operational complexity. I'm always amazed at how producers can work within complex environments. I was sort of the wrench holder on our farm. I just sort of watched in amazement as my brother and my dad worked with complex issues on our farm, that engage machines, sometimes livestock, sometimes issues that were external, and they could figure out the problem, they could work on the problem, they could solve the problem, they could get back out in the field. Like, I think producers and agriculture leaders are good at working with complexity, but they're also a bit concerned about the added complexity that can often occur as ag technology comes into play. Risk is critical. I think again, producers are, they're absolutely risk tolerant. Agriculture production, especially primary production, it's a risky game. We know that for sure. But there's also a tremendous awareness of other kinds of risks that technology can often bring. And that can be in terms of glitches, time loss. I've talked to a producer, one of our board members, who talked about a precision ag, sort of recipe that was being, put into his tractor. They were putting prescription in, and they were also trying to, ensure that it all sort of worked, and it really, cratered in his, in the whole process. It went down. He had 3 companies engaged at once trying to get his seeder up and running. He finally just pulled the plug and went to work. That was time loss. It was frustrating for him, and it sort of there's a sense that he was set backwards by the ag tech in that case than really being progressing. The sense of the worry of wrecks, I call them wrecks. If you're thinking about situations where you sort of have one shot at it, whether it's one shot a year at a good crop, one shot per flock at a good result. I can remember in our turkey barns, getting pitched on different kinds of sensors and monitors and that sort of thing. Well, if we had fans go down in our barn for even a 6-hour period, I could lose up to 1,000 birds, and that would be a catastrophe. So there's a sense that the technology better work. It better have some real robustness to it, or it's going to be difficult for those companies and those technologies to take root. So given that, you need to think, if you're a technology company looking to move into the agriculture space and adopt your ag tech, you need to be thinking about pre-commercialization. Think hard about that. Think hard about how you can get to a working technology and iterate at scale within a variety of conditions. So it's important to understand going from a lab sort of environment to even a plot scale environment to a commercial scale environment. Those are big steps. And you need to get to that scale pretty quickly, and also within a variety of conditions. And you really need to think about engaging the end user, because hitting the bullseye fast is important. And that does include thinking about, how your technology is going to apply to a variety of conditions. It's going to, how does your technology, it might work well in a flat, sort of perfect sort of quarter section kind of environment, but there's a lot of variation in our agriculture system, globally, certainly in Alberta as well. Different kinds of, we have flat land, we have rolling land, we have hot, dry conditions in the south part of the province, we have wet, short seasons in the northern part of the province, and how that technology sort of works within that variability is really important. So hitting the bullseye fast within all of those sort of context is really important. Also keep in mind that you have less cycles to iterate than you would in many other sort of commercial applications. It's really an annual cycle, right? Especially at scale. So when you're putting your technology at scale within a demonstration farm or a demonstration sort of environment, you're only going to have sort of one cycle per year. And so that's something to keep in mind and to think about as part of your commercialization strategy. I often talk about this traditional mindsets. This is an issue that's beyond just agriculture, but certainly in agriculture, if we think about systems, again, if you're focused on this is the issue and we've got the technology to solve it, or this is the question and we got the technology to answer it, you're going to potentially be fragmented in respect to the other parts of the industry. We like to think about integrated responses, how the technology engages with other technology solutions around larger scale issues, not just specific issues, but issues that are perhaps broader than yourselves, and how you integrate, complement, add value, and really are a part of a system. That integrated response approach is critically important if you're going to be successful. And I would say that's the philosophy that we carry at the Smart Farm. The Olds College Smart Farm was launched in 2018. It's now grown to over 2,000 acres. And it's really focused on the development, validation, demonstration of agriculture technology But the last point is really important. It's about an integrated response to the issues and opportunities in agriculture. If someone asked me, are you guys all about ag tech? I'd say no. We're all about, or at least we're trying to be about, the issues, the opportunities, and the questions of agriculture, and how we can forge collaborative responses to those issues. And using that philosophy, we're partnering with a number of different companies, organizations, funders, in order to pursue sort of those collaborative responses. And I'll give you a few examples of what some of those projects look like. So the first one is coming back to autonomous farm equipment. I think this is a tremendous opportunity again, but the problem or the issue that we need to address is how can the industry find sort of independent third-party information on the true environmental, social, and economic value of autonomous agriculture production? I would say the jury is still out on that, and that's fair. And so Olds College is looking to provide an opportunity for this platform to be demonstrated and operating at a commercial scale. And we're working with DOT, Seedmaster Pattison Sprayer, New Leader Equipment, and Raven, a platform of autonomous equipment to start collecting that independent information and really assessing the benefits and the challenges of autonomous agriculture production. And so we've gone through our first season, and we'll be doing a significant amount of our production again next year. That's seeding, spraying, fertilizing, utilizing this autonomous platform. Another interesting project is one focused on soil, climate, and crop sensor validation. So the problems, issues here is around connectivity again, robustness, quality, accuracy of data, the value of that data. And so our project is working with a number of players, sensor and network developers, to evaluate the functionality under conditions associated with Western Canada. What we find is a lot of technology that comes into Alberta. It works pretty good in some of the southern climates or other countries where it's the conditions are a little less severe. So how is it going to work in our kind of conditions here in Western Canada, where things can be quite variable and quite intense? Remote sensing using RPAS and satellite imagery. So again, looking at how imagery can be used as a tool for producers to make good in-season management decisions. So we're working with a number of companies on testing the efficacy and compatibility of various data layers, not only as individual layers, but as a compilation of layers, so that so that producers can really start making some informed and important decisions as they go. This is an interesting project around optical spot spraying technology. One of the technologies that we're working with actually has come out of Australia. And this is something that we're starting to see at the Smart Farm is technology that's coming from outside of Canada being tested at the Smart Farm to understand its applicability and its value within the North American context or the Western Canadian context. The idea of spot spraying really comes from Australia, where they have some weed resistant issues. They have a real challenge with that. North America does too, but Australia is even more so. And so how can they apply chemical and other inputs in a more precise way so that they're using less and potentially addressing some of those issues? And so that's been important for Australia. And so we're looking at how we can translate that into Western Canada and assess the long-term economic and environmental advantages. And we're working with Croplands and AFSC on that particular project. As well, real-time soil nutrient grain protein analysis is just another example of addressing the problem or issue around robustness, ease of use, quality of data, and whatnot. So we're working with a couple of companies on that particular project as well. And we are also working on issues and opportunities further up the value chain. This is an example of Olds College working with a couple of companies, Grain Discovery and Decisive Farming, on addressing the opportunity to provide consumers with a greater understanding of where and how their food or drink is produced. And that's led us to a traceable beer using malt barley grown here at the Olds College Smart Farm. So I check it out. It's delicious. And I think it's a great example of collaboration. So another important initiative that we're a part of is an initiative called CAIN, the Canadian Agri-Food Automation Intelligence Network. And I understand that this has probably been talked a little bit about today, so I won't dwell on it. But what I'm trying to show here is that when you're looking as a company in developing and validating and demonstrating your technology, there are initiatives such as CAIN, which provides access to a network of research farms and companies that can really support that development. So we're really proud to be a part of this partnership with 7 other core partners. We're building a network in order to advance agri-food and technology. We're very, very keen on being a complement to other key initiatives such as PIC and others who I know are also on the session today and really support the research and innovation. It's really about extending the network of capabilities to support ag tech development and commercialization across the country. That's what this is about. It's one of the things to keep in mind, if it hasn't been mentioned, is there's going to be an open call for funding coming up in the fall. So if you don't know CAIN, I check it out and pay attention, because there could be some opportunities for partnerships and funding through that particular network. Olds College just continues to broaden its network. We recognize that in order to extend the capacity that's needed for companies to test, develop, and scale their technologies, they need to extend beyond just the Olds College footprint. So we're really excited about the partnerships that we have that we're generating with other progressive producers, with other institutions such as Lakeland College and other research farms across the country. And we also are looking at and continue to build partnerships across North America and around the globe as well, particularly in Australia. So we conceptualize this approach in the context of an ecosystem, a smart ag ecosystem, an interconnected environment that connects beyond ourselves, that's an open environment for companies and for research organizations to come and to work on important challenges, thereby leveraging our land base, our agriculture operations, and our partnerships to support innovation and entrepreneurship. I want to touch on one more challenge, and this is, I think, more relevant, or I think this is as relevant. It's not quite as specific to the challenges of ag tech per se, but I think it is, because it is a broader issue that needs to be called out and needs to be talked about. And that's the fact that agriculture is experiencing and is going to continue to experience a labor shortage. And technology is contributing to it. The Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council in 2019 provided a report that projects that there will be 123,000 jobs unfilled by 2029. And what's important is they actually identify technology jobs and high-skilled jobs as a big component of that gap. So of course that's a challenge for Olds College, but it's going to be a challenge for many of the companies that are looking to develop technology, as well as the producer community that needs the talent in order to apply a lot of this technology on farm and within the industry. And this is a skills gap that is more than just agriculture, but it definitely applies to agriculture as well. And I'll let one of our other agriculture neighbors talk a little bit more about some of the skill sets that are needed.
The need for taking data, just raw data, analyzing it, interpreting it, and then putting it into a plan that's going to make a difference or add value or make better management. That is probably one of the biggest challenges over the next period of time that you're going to, and we are seeking out people that are going to have the ability to be able to help us move data, organize data, analyze data, and get it down to a decision-making process it's going to be one of the most important things over the next 3 to 4 years for our farm. It's one of the high priorities.
Spencer Hilton and Hilton Ventures, they're a really, really interesting farm down in the Strathmore area. They're connected to Origin Brewery, and they've done some just tremendous things in applying technology on farm. They're actually one of the first farms to bring in an air seeder in Alberta. So I just, you know, I think it's really important that we listen to folks like Spencer because they understand what the challenges are and what's needed, both in terms of how to apply ag tech, as well as the kinds of skill sets that are going to be needed in order to support ag tech and the progression of the agriculture sector more generally. Sorry, I need to start it again. There we go. And why does it matter? This is I think a fantastic bit that I took out of RBC's Farmer 4.0 report. If you haven't read the report, it's really, really interesting. It talks about and it does it in a real analytical way, that the fact that Canada could gain 11 billion in annual GDP by 2030 by closing the agriculture labor gap and accelerating investment in technology. I believe that agriculture and agriculture technology is a critical sector and a critical focus for our Canadian economy. I think it's the most important sector and focus for our Alberta economy. And that requires, I think, a real response in terms of filling that skills gap, but also understanding how to commercialize and how to engage the agriculture industry in order to get adoption happening faster, to really support the integration of technology in the agriculture sector. And I think that if we can just continue to evolve and mature our ag tech ecosystem here in Alberta and Western Canada, we truly can be global leaders in not only food production, but in ag tech innovation going forward. So that's my presentation. And Brent, I just want to thank you for the opportunity. I really think Alberta IoT has been just doing some amazing things, and the fact that you're engaging the agriculture sector in this discussion and thinking about how IoT connects to the agriculture sector is just so critically important. And it was great to see the response for this session. And I would say that there's a real receptive audience in the producer community and the agriculture sector in general in how we can, you know, come together and really foster a new sort of burgeoning industry in agriculture technology. So again, thank you for the opportunity to present to you today.
Well, thank you, Stuart. That was actually quite insightful, to say the least. And you had some really important valid points, like the whole thing around systems of systems was really incredible. There's one or two questions, and I think the biggest one, would these data functions suit seeking out analytical service companies or hiring engineers, business intelligence directly as part of one's own corporation? Sorry, did you catch that, Stuart?
Yeah, I did catch that.
Okay.
And yeah, I would say absolutely. I think it's really vital that we move forward in a way that truly represents evidence, an evidence-based approach. I think companies that have technology to offer or technology to pivot into the agriculture space, they need to do their homework. They need to engage the agriculture sector. They need to do the analysis to truly understand how it fits, how it applies, and they need to not stop. They just need to continue to do that. So I'm not sure if I'm totally answering the question, but I would say that if you don't have, if you're not an expert in the agriculture sector, if you don't have that internally, you should be looking outside of your company to bring in that kind of support, that kind of analytical capacity to truly understand the industry and where your fit is.
Beautiful. So we are now going to go into our next breakout session. Stuart will have a room. So for those of you who end up in his room, you can have a conversation with them. So we have the facilitators from the Protein Supercluster panel before, and then we have a couple of our sponsors. So Yemi, can you pop us into our room, please? everybody find it in your room? What did you guys go over?
Yeah, it was a really interesting discussion. We talked about intellectual property. We talked about different kinds of value streams that come from agriculture and the examples in which they've been commercialized. I think it was a really interesting discussion and hopefully valuable for the folks in the room.
Awesome. Wilson, what about your room?
Yeah, we had a great conversation actually that we were just talking about from how do we delineate Canadian products and the flow of information in two directions. So how does the farmer know that all of the effort they've put on to collect data that can be used to identity preserve or high value the crop, that it ends up in those fancy General Mills rolled oats bags, or in that beer in San Francisco. And so that conversation around how can we follow and learn from the wine example, and what do we need to do to achieve that?
Excellent, thank you. Virginia, what about in your room?
Sorry, that was Dawn was moderating, so I'm going to let her speak.
Okay, yes, Dawn, sorry.
Sorry, sure. So we covered a lot of ground. We did talk a lot about how to actually get the technology adopted and get those end users engaged. So we talked a lot about building relationships, really going out to those small towns, talking with producers, keeping an open, curious mindset, really facilitating those open communications. We also talked about how you might want to have your products ready to deliver to producers and being able to communicate what exactly might be useful to them. So don't just say, oh, my technology is great and it can do all these amazing things. You want to say it's going to improve your yields by X amount of bushels per acre, and really being very clear on your value proposition there. So it was a very busy and good session. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So we are going to finish up for the afternoon. I want to thank all of our presenters, all of our speakers. It's been awesome. You guys have delivered a lot of information. We have recorded the session, so tomorrow morning you all will receive it. So that way, if there's anything you want to dig into a little bit deeper, you can. And again, thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck, guys.